Diplomacy goes by the board, and the story of the fair itself is eclipsed by a crackling exchange between Nixon and Khrushchev, begun off camera and finished off before the American Ampex color videotape recorders. Every aspect of the Cold War and Soviet-American rivalry is argued in blunt and forthright terms. The threat of atomic warfare, diplomacy.
Contact sheets show how you think visually, and they're very interesting from that point of view. If you see contact sheets of really good photographers, you can learn a great deal. The contact sheets of Henri Cartier-Bresson, if he would have allowed you to see them, because he didn't when he was alive, you could learn a lot. And other photographers who would permit you to see them. My name is Elliot Erwitt, and I have been that some time.
Smiles and emotions are raised by his photos, but there are also two elements that constitute normality when together. Elliot Erwitt, born in 1928, a Magnum Photos veteran, is the photographer who grasps the wonder in everyday normality. His career began in a dark room at 15, and a camera will be his constant companion, accompanying his every moment as a mask for his shyness and as an expression of his spirit. Sarcasm, subtle irony, and the pleasure of paradox mark his words just as his every photo.
I don't know, I'm a, what do you call it, a salade russe. I was born in Paris, but I was raised in Italy, and in Los Angeles, and in New York. Of course, all these things have an impact on your life and on your attitude towards almost everything. My interest in photography started when I was 15 years old. It started with the purchase of a plate camera, which was kind of a toy, you might say. And then it developed into a profession because I've been I've been on my own since I was 16 and a half years old. And I've been earning my living since then with one sort of camera after another.
A Magnum photographer since 1954, Elliot Erwitt will take his first steps doing photo reportage for American illustrated magazines. The reader is meant to smile and dream with the images of the world which photographers give to the press. But those are the years in which the Cold War keeps a check on two absolute powers that are determined not to yield. And so Elliot Erwitt will document crucial happenings and people such as Richard Nixon and Nikita Khrushchev, who will change history.
I photographed Nixon many times, on many occasions, when he was running for president, and lost when he was, when he won, when he was in the White House. He was a public person and he was photographed by a lot of people. What do I think of him? Well, I never thought very much of him. Having lived in California, where he began his career as a politician at the expense of other people, I already had formed my opinion about him. He ran against a woman called Helen Gahagan Douglas. It was one of the dirtiest, nastiest campaigns in which he won. And I think that sort of established him as the kind of person that he was in the mind of people who cared about such things.
The photograph of a railway station taken by Henri Cartier-Bresson was a revelation to the young Erwitt. He had left California, moved to New York, and had begun associating with the group of Magnum photographers. Once Erwitt's military service was over, Robert Capa wanted him as a permanent member. From that day on, Elliot Erwitt will attain international fame by becoming one of the absolute icons of the prestigious agency.
They were all very helpful and supportive, and Capa was a daredevil. You know that he invented himself. His name was not Robert Capa, his name was Andre Friedman. And he invented himself as the famous American photographer Robert Capa in order to sell his pictures. You see, hype was even useful then in those days. And it created a whole new person of himself.
The photo, which shows Nixon pointing a finger at Khrushchev with an air of challenge, is one of the photos by Elliot Erwitt that has marked an era. The two superpower leaders defying one another in 1959 with acrid words while standing among the appliances of a prefabricated kitchen of the American National Exposition in Sokolniki Park in Moscow. Gone down in history as the kitchen debate, that encounter has become the emblem of a cultural and technological duel which will translate into a political clash. On the one hand, the American capitalism of Nixon in a display of its luxury goods, from washing machines to Cadillacs, from high-heeled shoes to ready meals and Coca-Cola. On the other, the emphasis of Khrushchev for essential goods, with a barb of sarcasm.
Says Mr. Key, the Soviet will overtake America and then wave bye-bye.
I was working for Westinghouse refrigerators, pretty far away from a confrontation between East and West. I had an assignment in Moscow to take pictures of Westinghouse refrigerators at a industrial show in Gorky Park. And while I was there working for Westinghouse, there was a state visit of then Vice President Nixon. So I attached myself to the press people and had the good fortune of being in the right place at the right time to get a picture that became famous, simply because of the two people and the Cold War and the arrogance of Nixon and the arrogance of Khrushchev and so on. So all the elements were there right to make this photograph. I happened to be in the Macy's kitchen at the time when they arrived and essentially posed in front of me. In photography, good luck is extremely important. It's one of the main requirements.
In those years, Russia, the land of his parents, was a power which the world looked upon in fear. Erwitt had narrated it a few years earlier, not only showing the political ostension, but also grasping the normality of daily life, denied to Western eyes.
I had the good fortune to be in the Soviet Union in 1957 during the anniversary of the so-called Great October Revolution, where they displayed for the very first time, their intercontinental missiles. And I was able to photograph them in Red Square, and it was a world scoop. I took the pictures, and I realized how important they would be. So I processed them in my room, in my hotel room, right afterwards, just knowing that in some cases you would risk ruining your film by going through baggage. I notified Life magazine at the time that I had this exclusive. It was a scoop. I mean, the pictures were used all over, and I was a hero for a day. But, you know, that was it.
Erwitt collected many portraits of celebrities in the course of his career. But it's definitely Marilyn's face which inspired the photographer most, with a mixture of intimacy, lightheartedness, and sexuality.
This picture of Marilyn Monroe doesn't have any particular story. It's just a sitting that I had with her during the filming of one of her movies in New York. I was involved in the Misfits. I was involved in another movie that she was in before, and I had some private sessions. She was very nice to me, perfectly intelligent, nice woman, and we got along fine. Some number of sittings with her, and the thing about Marilyn is that you couldn't really take a bad picture of her, and I guess this is one of the pretty good pictures of her. No, she wasn't acting at that time. She was just, I guess, relaxing and just having a chat. That's the best way, I think, to photograph people without much fanfare, without... She became extra famous by dying young, which is, of course, one of the great career moves for people. If you die young, and you're kind of famous at the time, you're likely to have a very good career. It's a shame that it works that way, but when you consider that she might be, had she been alive, she would be 85 years old now, or 86 years old. It's an interesting thing to contemplate.
It will be the face of another woman, Jacqueline Kennedy, which will move the world. The reportage is dedicated to one of the most dramatic days in the 20th century America.
When he was assassinated, I immediately went to Washington to cover the funeral as best I could. And part of that was his burial in the cemetery in Virginia. I had a good position near the grave. I had a big lens, and I got that picture, which was a rather touching picture of the widow and the brother at graveside. I mean, the situation was so emotional that any representation of it would have been touching and special. But in this particular case, there's one element in the picture which is sometimes passed over, but there's actually a tear from her eye stuck into her veil, which is, I think, sets it apart from many of the other ones.
The two pictures of the kitchen debate, somewhat due to instinct, somewhat due to luck, will remain in history as the image of an open confrontation between the two superpowers that make the world tremble. It will be the dynamics of gestures, looks, and unspoken words that will later fire the imagination. The reality of the facts, in the words of the photographer himself, was completely different.
In public, people do not discuss state affairs. I think in public, with photographers around and people around, they posture. Politicians, that's their job, to posture. But serious things are usually done in closed doors. Khrushchev and Nixon were simply posturing for whoever was watching. I'm sure if there was substance, and I'm sure there must have been, to be discussed, it was done under closed doors in the Kremlin, and as things usually are. But politicians, when they're out, and when especially Nixon, who was very eager to promote himself as the person who stood up to the Russians, stood up to the Soviets, for him it was important to seem assertive. And that's why the picture of him poking his finger in the chest of Khrushchev was such a useful thing for him, particularly in his campaign for president, which in particular he lost. They gave that picture as a courtesy to the person who became his public relations official. And before I knew it, that picture was everywhere, being used as proof of the toughness of Nixon. It was used without my permission, without my authorization, but that's the way it goes. I certainly would have been very upset to be responsible in any way for his victory, but he lost.
Dogs, children, and romanticism are Erwitt's recurring themes, a sensitivity which accompanies all his works, unique images that have made history, and which constitute an extremely personal, recognizable view of the world.
This is a fancy dog wearing a rose by Balenciaga, I think, the dress designer. I like taking pictures of dogs, even if they're fancy. That's why it's an elegant dog with an elegant flower. By the same token, I take pictures of less elegant dogs. For instance, that picture was taken across the street from my house in Central Park, and it's one of my more amusing photographs, I think. Dogs are very sympathetic. They're everywhere in the world. They're uncomplicated. They don't mind being photographed, and they don't ask for prints. I think those are very good reasons, and also they make very sort of human-like subjects. The picture of two lovers in a rearview mirror is at the end of Sunset Boulevard in Santa Monica. It was put away, just another picture, and then 25 years later, when I was looking through my contact sheets, I noticed it, and I thought, well, maybe this is a good one to print, and it's sort of become a kind of a signature picture for me. But again, it was a discovery. I suppose there are other discoveries that I could make, and that's what I'm doing now in my old age, going through my old work and seeing what it is that may be of some use. My pictures of 50 years ago look rather similar, except for the cars in the background. But my professional pictures have changed enormously. They changed with the market conditions. That's what I mean about being a professional photographer. You stay with the trends, with the requirements, with the machinery, and you earn your living that way. But my personal work is unchanged. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's a fact.